was from 6 to 6:45 tonight. So I'm not quite sure if we'll have somebody join us from there. So maybe, Lona, I know you have to leave early for a meeting. So why don't we start with you? You're on mute.
There we go.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Suzanne. So we had our walkthrough the last week of October. I don't remember the exact date, whatever that Thursday was. And we had on hand Principal Berkowitz, our Director of Logistics, Ms. Montgomery, our school nurse, our 2 custodians, and then on the parent and teacher side, we had 4 teachers, 2 LSAT members, and a PTA representative, which was myself.
And was this Watkins that you did the
This was Watkins.
Okay.
And remember that Peabody is with Watkins for the foreseeable future because of the flood and the repairs that are going on at Peabody.
Okay.
So our pre-K 3, 4, and kindergarten are all at Watkins, at least for, I would say, a couple of months.
Okay.
So we had, I would say that we are in the ready category based on what I saw. We walked through a couple of spaces. One, how children would enter the building. We then walked over to the supply area, which is behind our cafeteria. We had at the time 1 solid month of supplies. So I know we're technically supposed to have 2, but we had a solid month in hand, and the request was for the remaining 1 month of supplies. At that point, it was like 2 or 3 days after things were starting to shut down and realizing that we were not going back to school in person. So there was, so just wanted to mention that as well. We had gloves, medical gowns, shoe covers, masks, and bottled water. And when we pressed our principal and director of logistics, they said the only thing that they were missing were the communicator masks, which hearing impaired students use. But everything else, they had a solid month of supplies. Our director of logistics had a very detailed spreadsheet and had worked out a system with our 2 custodians, whereby which if something dipped below a certain level, it would trigger her to order more supplies through DGS. That same system was used in the 2 classrooms that we saw. All of the things that I mentioned were placed in each individual classroom that the care students would be in. The teachers pushed back a little bit and asked for more of those supplies to be on hand in each of the individual classrooms. And so our 2 custodians said that they would use, need be even a second cabinet to stock more gloves, masks, shoe covers, and gowns. And then we walked through 2 classrooms. One would be a CARES classroom, and the other on the 2nd floor, which would be an in-person classroom. And the classrooms were staged as if this was going to happen the next day. All the desks were 6 feet apart. We measured them, and we saw the supply cabinets. And we walked through from those 2 classrooms. Then we walked through the 2 different entrances, the second entrance by which our older students would enter. So our littles will come through the main entrance of Watkins, and we're lucky enough to have enough space to have a second entrance for the older kids that would come through on the E Street side where our little library is. And I think that's it. I'm happy to answer other questions, but I felt that we were in the prepared category, and certainly had a system and were organized. Aside from the missing, month of supplies, we're in good shape.
And were there the air filters there?
We did not see. We were told that the air filters were put in, that they were going to be replaced on a regular basis by DGS, which we flagged for Principal Berkowitz. We didn't have the, highest level of confidence that DGS would be replacing on a consistent basis. And he noted that, but he did say they had been placed in our units.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Lona.
Mhm.
Rebecca, do you want to go next?
Sure. I continually feel like my children are a lot better about the Zoom stuff than me. It takes me a while to unmute. But it's a fairly similar story. Although we met after we knew that we were not going back the way that DCPS had announced. On our walk, we had our principal, our director of strategy, which is Todd Pastwick. We had myself, the LSAT representative, the one teacher who was the WTU representative, our head custodian, Commander Kane from our police district, who is also a parent, and Laura from Charles Allen's office, and I think that's it. Our school nurse, our vice, and our assistant principal. My main takeaways from this is that the problems about reopening are really about staffing and not about the building. I left feeling pretty confident that in terms of our building and the protocols, I think we're in pretty good shape. We went through, similarly to the cluster school, we went through exactly how kids would be coming into the building and how they would be going to their classrooms. We visited their classrooms. We had a lot of discussions about like what happens if, very specific things that I found were helpful. Like, if are kids going to be required to put on the mask of the school supplies, or can they bring their own mask? What happens if a kid comes down with symptoms in the middle of the day as opposed to the beginning when they're being screened? So I found all that pretty helpful, and I found the responses thoughtful. I also really liked the fact that they had thought about things like, one of my concerns, if a teacher is in a classroom and some kid needs to go to the bathroom, like, who's monitoring them as they go from the classroom to the bathroom? Are they going to be, who's monitoring to make sure they're behaving and wearing a mask and whatnot? And so each of the custodial staff is going to be assigned a floor, and they're not going to leave the floor. And so they will be sort of in the hallway at all times. So any movement they see in the classroom, if they see a kid going to the bathroom, they know to go to the bathroom immediately after to clean it. So all that stuff I thought had been quite well thought out. Yeah, I guess that's, again, so I left feeling confident about the building. We are also lucky because Van Ness has been recently renovated. So everybody on the school side of things were very, very confident about DCPS's investment in HVAC. So they felt strongly that that was very well in place. So the building seems fine. It's, again, I leave just like, how are we going to manage this people-wise? So, but in terms of the walkthrough, it's fine.
Okay, so there's a question in the chat. I'll ask Rebecca and Lona. You talked about, I know Lona did, about having 1 month of supplies. Is that, and it sounds like the number of students they're planning to have come to school has been significantly reduced. So is the 1 month of supplies based on the number of students they originally projected, or these reduced numbers that we think we're going to see for students coming back?
It was my understanding that the 2 month of supplies were based on the original numbers of the kids coming back to school.
Okay, so
Here.
So do you think that now there's sufficient supply, since it sounds like a significantly fewer?
I think so. And similarly to Van Ness, we are not opening this week, and that's because of staffing.
Okay. All right.
We actually have way more supplies than we had, definitely more than a month, even for the original amount that was originally intended going back. So that did not seem to be a problem.
Okay. Okay. So Cedric has joined, is that right? Hello, Cedric. You're on mute. Do you want to share with us the School Without Walls walkthrough?
Hi, good evening, everybody. I just got off the phone with our principal and our HSA president, and we learned that we are not opening this week either.
So is this Francis Stevens?
That is correct. The plan had been to open one CARES classroom on Wednesday, but they don't have staff for it, and they don't have enough students for it either. They had set as a baseline a requirement that they have at least 9 students in order to launch the class, and they only have 6 at this point. The class would be a combination 4th and 5th grade. And so they've got 3 4th grade students and 3 5th grade students that have thus far committed. But now they're looking at a date in December to possibly launch it if they can cure those 2 deficiencies, that is staffing and enrollment. Now, I can go on and talk about the facility. You want to hear about that. That is to say that we are fortunate in some respect because, as some of you may know, we had portable classrooms installed over the summer. And that was a result of the skyrocketing enrollment at our school. I think our enrollment currently is 587. You know, some would say that that's about 100 over the built capacity of the school. So these 6 portable classrooms are going to be the site for launching any kind of instruction. And so they've picked one of those classrooms for the CARES. Their contention is that because this is a new facility, the HVAC system, the plumbing system, et cetera, are all state of the art. And so we should be comfortable with that. Though, as it stands now, they're not putting a HEPA filter in that classroom, nor a monitor, an air quality monitor in that classroom. The basic representation is it's new. It must be up to snuff. So we're going to go with it. But we're still asking questions about that because I think that we need information that clearly establishes that it is safe to open. Now, let me just say that with respect to these air quality monitors, the DCPS folks say we're going to have a total of 9. There's 1 that's been installed as kind of a pilot in the library. The others have yet to arrive. The school administration has no idea of how they're supposed to operate, whether they will alert in the classroom. They have been told that there'll be some kind of monitoring unit installed in the school office, and alerts would come to the school office to the attention of the administrators there. And as to what kind of response would be appropriate, you know, not clear yet. What standard of air quality would trigger an alert? Not clear on that yet. So these are, you know, the main issues that we still have question about that lead us to wonder whether or not it's safe to start a CARES class in even a new portable classroom.
So there's a couple questions in the chat regarding, and I'll now ask Lona and Rebecca and Cedric, and I see Donica's on too, about isolation rooms. If a student was to get sick during the day, did you all see or have isolation rooms, I guess, identified at your schools?
Yes, it was a first floor classroom.
At Francis Stevens, if someone came in and had a temperature over 100.4, they would be ushered into the auditorium where the nurse and the medical techs would be there to further assess them and call parents as needed. If you're, if in our school, the auditorium is just across the hallway from the entrance. So people could easily be ushered in there. The nurses suite is up on the second floor on the west end of the school in the back. So that's why they're not trying to move people up there. They're going to move them into the, auditorium and triage from that point.
Okay. And there's some questions in the chat about bathrooms. I think mostly about protocols and whether some are designated for certain grades. Can anybody share what you
Well,
learned?
if you don't mind, let me jump on that. Because we're only looking at operating one classroom in a portable unit that basically has 3 classrooms on one side of the hallway, 3 classrooms on the other side of the hallway, and in the hallway there's the restrooms. On one side you have the boys' class restroom. The other side you have the girls' classroom, and on one side there's also kind of a who gets their unisex bathroom. They're going to post a janitor at a desk in the hallway. So whenever the janitor sees somebody come out of a classroom to go use the restroom, they know then that needs to be cleaned and sanitized immediately thereafter. There's also going to be a desk at the other end of the hallway for a security person. Because this portable classroom is, kind of outside the school building proper. It has its own entrance, and they feel that it's necessary to have, because you can enter it from the outside, a security person at that door too. So that's pretty much what's going to manage security in the bathroom. The observant janitor who will respond and give appropriate attention to the toilets, faucets, door handles, soap dispenser, and all such things between every apparent utilization.
Okay, thank you, Cedric. Is there anything else you want to add, Cedric, before we move on to?
Well, one of the things that we observed during the walkthrough was that the water didn't seem to get sufficiently hot, even in the new portable restrooms. The interim principal has told us that they have dialed up the boiler so that the water should be hotter. But obviously for hand washing, you got to have hot water to do it effectively. So we haven't been back to the school to determine whether in fact that has been remedied, but that was cause for concern. In that portable classroom hallway, there are water fountains, which of course have been taped off, but one of them has a dispenser to fill your water bottle. And they have tables next to them where they plan to put bottled water as well. So, so that's pretty much what we have. Again, continuing concerns about the HVAC, but again, we're being asked pretty much to keep hope alive because it's a new building, and whether it has, and there's no HEPA filter thing in it. And nobody has told us yet whether the air conditioning unit on top of that portable has the MERV filters in it either. So, still questions about the readiness of the facility. But the good thing is, it's not opening this week. It'll maybe another month. And if they don't get more than 6 students, it may not open at all.
Okay, thank you, Cedric. So Donica, let's go to you now.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks. Sorry I'm a little late. It was on our SIT meeting. So we had...
And Donica, are you you're not talking about the renovated school yet?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me talk about it. I'm talking about our swing space, which is because we still will be in that until theoretically next fall. If all goes.
Okay, thank you.
So we are still in the Meyer. It's an older building. And we did our walkthrough before, when we thought it was going to be 4 classrooms, 2 cares and 2 regular classrooms. But now, then obviously that's changed. But We had DCPS facilities, Andrea Swatocha, our instructional superintendent, Andrea Carruthers. We had Bajan, who's on the call now. Our principal, our AP, our custodian, and one teacher came with. We had the LSAT chair and me. We had our PTSO vice president, and then we had Councilmember Allen, staff Laura Marks. That was who was on the tour. The general feeling is that the way we felt as the parents in the group was that the principal had really tried her best. The custodians did a really good job kind of laying out the pathways, how people would move in and out and across hallways. We saw every room, including the isolation room, the nurse's suite, all the different things. I think what most of our concerns were directed at DCPS for their or DGS, their lack of sort of follow through and having answers to questions. So I'll quickly run through on the PPE. They displayed it, we saw it, but neither DCPS or the school could say how much stockpile they had. And if we had gone in person and on this, I think and especially with the increase in numbers, we should be getting transparent numbers on stockpiles of all this stuff if we go in person, because there's gonna be shortages anywhere. Like, we don't know. Obviously that's different now, but we are concerned about that. The classrooms were close, marked with X's, clearly distant. All of those things were very organized. There were a few rooms, isolation room, and a few others that hadn't been adequately prepped yet. I think they just ran out of time, but we are told that since then they were. There was one room too small for as many people as going to be in there, and they were, even though they had tried to do it, it really wasn't big enough for a teacher and all the kids they wanted, so they were going to rethink that. There was another room, they're going to rethink the layout. They had kids facing each other like in a circle. And I think, again, this goes to DCPS's lack of guidance. Like, what is the best scientific guidance? It's not the principal didn't try hard. I mean, she's doing her best to protect everybody, but lack of guidance on how should desks face and things like that. So we had lots of discussion about that. The signage wasn't the code that was on the list, but it was because we're waiting for DCPS to send them. They're supposed to be a certain size, multiple languages, and durable, right? And they hadn't sent them yet. They did, but they didn't send us enough, and they only sent English. So we still have an issue about that. Water access was fine. Our HVAC, it's an old building. They had HEPA filters in every room that we were going to be using, but they had found out in the process that we needed 6 giant fans on top of the building, like there wasn't proper air circulation. And that was actually at the time not done, but they were very willing to tell us that all the tests were fine, but it sort of sense. If you don't have the HVAC working right, you can't test it the way it's going to be with kids in it. So we did ask for the test results. They said they would look into it. They haven't gotten back to us. But as of late last week, they were still finishing the roof, delays because of rain. And there was not a new set of testing yet. And to me, the big interaction between HEPA and the actual airflow is the most critical factor in all this. It doesn't matter if you have a HEPA, it doesn't matter if you have HVAC, it's how they interact and what the test results show. So to me, that's one of the biggest things. We had a small issue with plumbing, but it was just like fixing a little pipe thing. They did fix that after our tour. We saw all the rooms, like I said. The really specific things we asked to follow up on were all the things I mentioned, like, did you finish these things? But our parents really wanted to know, please, can we see the reports of any outstanding repairs that are in this building that are needed? Any testing that you've done, the actual HVAC air quality. Parents wanted to know why there wasn't testing of a randomized testing of asymptomatic students and teachers and others in the building planned, just an extra precaution. And then one of the biggest things that really highlighted to me, and I shared this earlier, Suzanne, but I really want to share with everybody that I don't think anyone's really talking about. And I think, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but from Van Ness, you were sort of hinting at this earlier, is that it's fine if we get the building right, but DCPS has not provided the guidance on what it looks like to be in a classroom all day with a bunch of kids. And when you stand in that room, you see how close the desks are. You see how stringent the X is where the child's gonna have to sit there. And then you picture a teacher and all of us have volunteered in classrooms. You know what classrooms look like and feel like. And my son said to me, Mom, I know my friends. I know exactly who's gonna wear their mask wrong. I know who's gonna run around. And he didn't say it in a mean way. He's just like, that's how kids are, you know? So there's no protocols, and DCPS, none of them can answer this. What is the protocol? What are the rights and responsibilities of teachers? And what are the rights and responsibilities of families that are in these classrooms? So if a child is persistently not wearing a mask, therefore putting the rest of the children and the teacher at risk, what is the teachers, besides saying, pull up your mask, they can't do what they usually do. They can't hug them or take them or put their hand, walk them across the room and have a silent moment with them. They don't have those tools in their toolkit. They can't sing with them. They can't do all these things. So what are the protocols? You can't kick them out of the room. You can't, what are the family's responsibilities for sharing those rules with the kids? And one of the instructional soup, talked about, well, there's the discipline regulations. Well, I don't know if that's the right, even if we have the discipline regulations, we don't have the protocols and process for teachers to know what they can and can't do. It's really hard. And I wish DCPS would just put on that hat and work with teachers on what those protocols, so everyone has parents and kids in whatever class they go to have a clear understanding. That to me is the nut nobody's cracked or talked about. And it's really important because even if you say, well, we have discipline things and, kids will be kids. Well, it's a different risk. It's not just that kid who isn't behaving, but now you're talking about life and potentially death. So anyway, that was how our tour ended, was that deep discussion that nobody can answer.
All right,
If I might raise one additional issue, food service.
Oh, thank you, Cedric.
Because we were told that in our one CARES classroom, there would be food in the morning and food for lunch. As we were told, when the kids come in the building, those that are cleared to go to the classroom, there will be on a table in the hallway, box breakfasts to pick up. This will be a cold meal. And each kid will take one with them to the classroom. Now that's, with their backpack and whatever gear they got, they're somehow supposed to juggle that. After they eat, there's supposed to be a waste receptacle in the classroom into which each kid is going to self-deposit their food waste. And then at some point after the meal is done, the janitor will come and collect and dispose of the food waste. As to what kind of safety disinfecting protocols are going to be utilized, I'm not clear, but that's breakfast. For lunch, we were told that a bag would come from the cafeteria that would come to be delivered to the classroom, and in that big bag would be individual bag lunches. Excuse me. The interim principal did not know whether these would be hot or cold meals. But each kid would be given one, or you could bring your own lunch from home. And then the same would occur after the meal was finished. Deposited in the waste container, the janitor would come and collect it and take it away. They also said that parents would be provided a menu so that you could see during the coming week what was going to be served. So if your child had special diet needs or didn't like peanut butter and jelly, you could make some adjustment by having them bring an alternative. I didn't get the sense that there would be special diet options where, if you were a vegetarian, that there would be a vegetarian bag in the big bag that you could get. So that too is another kind of worrisome thing. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just say what I hope we do now for the meeting. I wanted to give people an opportunity to ask our panel questions before we wrap up the panel. And then I want to give Charles opportunity to say a few words. And then what I'd like to ask is that people put in the chat questions that you have for Charles. And we will answer as many, he'll answer as many of them as he can. And we'll just see if we have too many questions, we may Charles ask to follow up with you on answers. So with that, I want to ask, does anybody have questions for the four who presented on their walkthroughs?
Hey, Suzanne, I do have a question.
All right.
So since I'm doing it on the phone, I can't put anything in the chat, but one of the concerns that came out of a recent Ward 7 Ed Council meeting that we attended was the checklist from the Washington Teachers Union. For those that were part of your walkthroughs, did you guys have a checklist? And if so, were you able to check off on items?
This is Cedric again. Yes, we had a checklist. The administration provided us the WTU checklist before the walkthrough, and then they gave us a checklist of their own to utilize.
Were you able to satisfactorily check off all the things on the WTU checklist?
Well, yeah, but for the things that we still had questions about, for example, well, what is the air quality standard that the monitors are supposed to be attuned to? Well, that's so there were, as I said, things, the checklist helped you focus your attention on things, but where you couldn't get the information to ultimately resolve it, it was left unchecked and a matter for follow-up. And as I mentioned, I was late getting on this call because me and the HSA president were on with the interim principal trying to see if she had, almost 2 weeks later, gotten any answers to the questions that we left the walkthrough with. And so she still is working on some of that stuff, which is disappointing.
So there are a number of questions in the chat, and I don't know if this is something that's on the WTU checklist, but just, did you see any HVAC assessments? Did they?
Well, let me say this. No, there's a document that we were given by the interim principal the day before. And what we had asked for were the reports that the contractors produced and provided DCPS. What we got was essentially a summary document that said this was done, that was done, or this was to be done. What I did, in fact, even prior to the walkthrough, was file Freedom of Information Act requests with both DCPS and DGS, asking for the reports that the contractors produced. Now, those are supposed to be provided to me later this week. So I'm keeping hope alive that I will in fact see the actual report, but I haven't seen it as yet.
So I'm seeing in the chat, Rebecca said that you didn't see any HVAC assessments at Van Ness. Lona, Donica, any?
We asked for them. They didn't give us any, except there's an HVAC system and we checked it.
Okay. Lona.
Principal Berkowitz said that we passed our HVAC assessment, but I didn't see a specific piece of paper.
Okay. Yeah, somebody said you shouldn't have had to FOIA that, Cedric. And good luck on your FOIA.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions right now about the walkthroughs before we move to Charles?
If I might, let me just mention that our council member in Ward 2, Brooke Pinto, came to a walkthrough. So we essentially had two walkthroughs on the 5th. One at 3 o'clock that the council member requested, and I attended that walkthrough with her and a member of her staff, as well as Dr. Ron Nichols from downtown, and Sharona Robinson, who is our community action team representative for Cluster 10. And then there was another walkthrough at 5 o'clock, excuse me, that was what had been initially scheduled for the LSAT, HSA, faculty, etc. So I stayed for that as well.
Okay. You've been on a lot of walkthroughs. Okay. I don't see any questions in the chat. So I think, so we're going to move now to Charles. So I want to encourage people to put questions in the chat while Charles is talking. And we'll try to get through as many of them as we possibly can. So Charles.
Suzanne. Thanks. Well, good evening, everybody. And thanks to everybody who's taken the time to walk through and the report outs you gave, and of course, a lot of work that goes on. I've walked through one of them myself, and my staff spread out so that we could try to get to several of them as well, so we kind of see what's going on and kind of hear from you as well. You know, I'm really frustrated and troubled with this entire process, and that's on multiple spheres or planes. You know, when we had, I've been pretty critical of DCPS's reopening plan, as it were. You know, I think I heard Donica, Rebecca, and a few other people kind of talk about there's the building issues that we can try to figure out and solve for some of those, you know, just infrastructure issues to make sure you got the right type of HVAC system or the right type of filter. But that's completely different from having the right type of system that is communicated well, has trust and buy-in in it, and that we'd send our kids to. And then we'd have our teachers work in. And that's the part that I feel like is really lacking. For a variety of reasons, I'll single out a couple of them, but there's more than this. But, you know, I've been really troubled with the lack of DCPS coming up with a testing system. When we had the one hearing that we were able to get the education committee to hold, which was the day before they announced and completely changed everything, it was this idea of we'll have a rapid test that has about a 30% failure rate on that test. And there was really no system, so much so the chancellor even would say that they would just ask if a kid did come in symptomatic, they would ask if a parent could come pick them up, hopefully maybe. There was no clear guidance that was there. There was no testing of our asymptomatic kids and teachers. And we all know from the science that we've seen that with a lot of our kids, they're going to be asymptomatic. So the testing system to me doesn't make any sense, and it does not inspire confidence and trust. You know, I think that the way in which they have worked with, or the lack of way in which they have worked with our teachers has completely undermined confidence. I think for a lot of families, as well as obviously for the teachers that we all depend on. I'm deeply troubled with the way they're trying to create this one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach from an equity standpoint. You know, I don't want to pick on any particular schools, but we know our schools in Ward 6, and we know that they are not all the same. And to say that we're just going to have the same number of students or the same number of classrooms in one school in one part of Ward 6, as opposed to another part where we know the at-risk needs are very different. If our goal is that we do have, and I do believe we've got kids that are really hurting hard in this pandemic and being out more so than others, we're not treating that with equity in mind. And so very much have a problem with that. And that's why I had gone out and said that I didn't think we should be moving towards this reopening. And now we see that we're dialing back. You know, when I walked through my own kid's school, you know, I saw some of the physical things that they, you know, I would say, yes, there's parts of what they had planned for and made sense around some of the investments, you know, and the systems in each room and all of that. Then again, some of it just doesn't work in a real world. I mean, the classroom for the 4-year-olds, I have a 4-year-old, with little desks and chairs and little taped X's, and you're going to somehow expect that a 4-year-old is going to sit there, just doesn't work, let alone probably my 8-year-old. And then on top of that, when the teachers looked at what they had, they basically had taped a plexiglass shield across one side of a 4-edged desk. And the teachers were like, in what world do you think the kid's going to come up to the plexiglass? Like, they're going to come straight to me because, of course, I want to touch them and hold them, and that's what we're used to. This doesn't work for us. For the CARES classroom, they had the desk set up, and at first it was like, oh, this is okay, this looks good, we can make this work, until I asked the question, where exactly are they supposed to plug their computers in? Because there were no extension cords, there were no power strips. Like, the computer charge is going to run out pretty fast. So there's no way to keep that device. Like, there were so many things that just, you can solve for those things, right? Like, you know, if you get enough brains together, we can solve for those. But I go back to kind of the systems that I think is really faulty. So I'm really concerned about the ways in which DCPS has been rolling this out. But I'll also say I'm really concerned with the way in which I don't think that you're going to hear my kids in the other room. It is that hour, I can tell right now. We had an entire summer and an entire fall, and we can beat up on DCPS. I also will be critical, though, of our education committee. I mean, we didn't hold a whole hearing. And I think we can appropriately beat up DCPS for not doing what they needed to do, but we had an education committee that wouldn't call a hearing. We finally got a hearing called because many of us just internally were revolting, saying, how in the world can we do this? The first offer was, well, how about I get the chancellor and we'll schedule a phone call for you? And that's wholly unacceptable. And we finally were able to get them to agree to hold a hearing, but it was on I think it was the Friday before they then come out on the Monday, and they wouldn't answer any questions about what they were going to do. But does anyone believe that they hadn't already made up their mind about what they were going to do, and they just waited and rolled it out on Monday? We've got one more hearing coming up that I can't, Suzanne, I saw you had the date. I just can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's maybe December 2nd.
Yes.
Is that right? So we'll have one more hearing on that. But when the education committee is not doing oversight, when it's not holding hearings, then that's what also is going to prompt us to look at legislation like what Councilmember Silverman's putting forward, to where many questions probably could have been answered through an oversight process, through a robust set of hearings and questions and going through that. But instead, you know, I'm very open to looking at this legislation as a way to say, how do we make sure we have a checks and balance on this, especially after the one hearing we do have was basically a bait and switch to then come back a couple days later with a whole nother plan in those details. So I think the numbers are really scary right now. The trends that we're seeing in terms of infections in DC are troubling, but definitely you look around the region and you just see where it's headed. And we, of course, know the mobility that we have across borders. No one cares about where the line is in the middle of the map. And we look around the rest of the country. So I think that we are heading towards, and there was some data today that got released showing where the highest incidence of transmissions taking place right now. And it was at social gatherings, restaurants, and gyms. I think we're the top three. That kind of tells you what actions and steps we need to be taking to roll back to our phase 1 reopening at least. And I think we're going to be headed there very soon. And it's really hard to argue why we can and push to open schools when we're going to be trying to roll those things back as well. So that's really problematic and troubling for me. And we also are learning, of course, as we look at other jurisdictions around here. So I probably should jump into questions that you guys are typing in the chat so I don't run out of time. But
so why don't we start asking you, we'll ask you the question, Charles.
I'm sorry, what's that, Suzanne?
I'll ask you the questions that are in the
okay.
chat.
Sorry, I thought you wanted me to read them and then answer them. You go for it.
Yeah, I'll do it for you.
That's probably easier.
Yeah. So the first one, Rebecca wrote this: I'm extremely concerned about the chancellor not allowing our principals flexibility to meet the goals of this partial reopening. All of our schools have a very different mix of students, families, and teachers. Flexibility is critical. I think you touched on that with your remarks about the one size fits all, but have there been specific discussions with DCPS about why they're focusing on, you know, the one size fits all approach with the CARES classrooms? And
the only conversation that I've been able to have with them is when they argue, frankly, the complete inverse of equity, but they still call it equity. So they'll say that having this classroom is equity, but I don't. It's like the exact opposite definition of it. So they really seem wedded to this idea, but then of course we're all watching as different CARES classrooms are falling off the list, and we're going to see them continue to fall out. So I have not had what I would call a productive conversation around getting them to change direction on this. They really seem wedded to this idea of what we do in one school is what we do in another school. And they seem really determined that that's the approach they want to take. I believe that's actually not equity. And what it's going to do is some at-risk kids in some school, you may be able to get an entire grades at-risk kids into one classroom. And we're going to have other classes where it's just not even going to scratch the surface.
So let me ask you this as a follow-on to this. DCPS had announced that in mid-October, student support centers were going to open up at, I think it was 13 schools. And those were efforts that were led by the schools and they were all different. Every school had something different. Has the council followed up on what has happened with those student support centers? Could the council encourage more of that, since it is more of a tailored approach to reopening at individual schools that reflects, what their community, I think, feels comfortable with and the makeup of their community?
Yeah, I think that based on the way that we've watched the one hearing play out, and the way in which the conversations are going, it's going to take us forcing, like what I think Alyssa's legislation is aiming at, by creating pressure points. That external pressure can help push DCPS more in the direction that we need. I would prefer that we'd actually see the committee do that, but if that's what it's going to take, I think some of the legislation is what we're going to have to be able to push. And so I think that's one of the ways we look at that. I think certainly when we look towards the December 2nd hearing, those are some of the things we're going to gear towards the hearing to ask lots of different questions around. But in the absence of that, because I think the legislation will come up on December 1st, so the day before that, that'll be the time to try to use as leverage time.
What legislation are you referring to?
The legislation that Councilmember Silverman, the emergency legislation, has put forward that will come up for a vote on December 1st.
But I didn't see anything in that specific to the student support centers. And
no, but sorry, what I mean is that you can use the legislation as leverage to try to push other elements. And I obviously can't speak for Councilmember Silverman, but the legislation that's filed now is, you can consider it kind of like a draft piece of legislation. And so there's, up until December 1st, there's a lot of things that can also be added, or reports that can be required, things like that. So there's a lot that can happen between now and December 1st. And I guarantee you, DCPS is going to absolutely hate that legislation. And so that's where it also can be used as leverage and a pressure point to try to get towards an outcome as well.
What is your assessment of that legislation right now in terms of support for it from a majority of council members? And are people working on amendments to it right now?
On the working on amendments, I wouldn't know yet. I don't, because it's so new. It was just circulated. I'd say it's a little early for us to know about that. In terms of the votes, it would need more than a majority. So it's going to need 9 out of 13 council members would have to vote for it. I would say there's probably not 9 votes for it right now. So a lot more conversations will have to continue.
Okay, I'm going to jump down to one of the questions about transparency, and this relates to COVID cases. We've had daycare centers that have been open, some private schools, some charter schools have been opened. Is there an effort in the city to track COVID cases at the daycare centers or schools that are open now? And what's the plan to track cases?
And I think this is coming from Sandra. So I don't know if you mean more from like the contact tracing from the data perspective of what data points and what questions are being asked. Is that what you mean?
Yes, but also I think last week Dr. Nesbitt said that there is no reporting around daycare data, right? Daycare cases in daycares, right? Well, first of all, there's no definition for what an outbreak is. And then there's no reporting on cases in daycares. And the DME is not reporting on cases or not requiring charter schools to report on cases in charter schools. And I think, private schools also. So like we're hearing from our networks that there are cases all over the place, that there are what we might consider outbreaks all over the place, but because it's not being tracked,
Okay, I see what you mean.
not being attributed to
Right.
to kids being together.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Thanks for
Can I
clarifying.
add to that too real quick? Councilmember Allen, sorry
Yeah,
to
that's okay, Erin.
interrupt. Yeah, it's just the reporting. It's my understanding that DC Department of Health is collecting all of it, but they have chosen not to report on these settings, not to have a breakdown on our coronavirus.dc.gov website for childcare centers, for schools, and across all three sectors. So that's the piece that seems to be missing.
Okay. I will say that we've, since the beginning, the data that was reported out has always been thin. And then through pushing, we kind of get better and better and better reporting out. So the data we have now that's posted is certainly better than where we started, back in the spring. One of the things that I could do from this conversation is I'll take this, on Wednesdays, we have a regular council mayor COVID call, and we send questions in advance of the types of things. So if you guys don't mind, I'll just take that question and try to ask, which is very specifically for that report out. Now, they may say no, but let me at least ask that way to see what we can do, which will then prompt the conversation. I will say though, I'm frustrated with Dr. Nesbitt on a lot of the data collection. I mean, I think of in a non-educational sector side right now, she refuses to have our contact tracers ask if someone did dine indoors or outdoors at a restaurant. That would be really important information for us to know about whether or not somebody was eating indoors or outdoors, because if we're going to, roll back, openings, and we're going to close indoor, or we're going to close all restaurants, having the data then helps us make a better decision. People generally think that eating outdoors is safer, but we actually don't know because she won't tell us. They don't even ask the question. And that's one of the important.
Yeah, they also don't have questions geared towards schools or childcare centers. Having talked to a couple parents that received contact tracing calls from outbreaks in childcare centers, they're not asked anything relevant to those settings.
Okay. So what I'll do, if I can, Erin and Sandra, if we can just email maybe tonight or tomorrow morning, and I can work with you, and that way I'll get that as part of my questions that I send for that Wednesday call.
So Donica, you have something also on transparency. Do you want to?
I just want to really echo what Sandra and Erin were both saying. To me, like if you could ask the questions at the weekly meeting, the same question every week, and if that's how we get the data, then we get the data. But like, it's crazy.
It shouldn't take that,
making decisions in a vacuum without any information. And I know personally of a school in DC with an outbreak. Erin knows personally of certain daycares. Like it's not any gotcha. If parents have to make decisions about whether to send school places, then the more data we have and we can understand the risks and mitigate that, teachers too, then it's just good public, good public stuff.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to be sure, Charles, do you need some more input from Erin and Sandra to form the question?
I think I've got it, but I might just shoot you an email just to make sure I got the right categories. But yeah, I think I got it.
Okay. All right. So this question is, DC had these DC Hope grants, and there was an article recently that an organization called Good Projects was given a grant to support a learning hub at the Greenleaf Gardens apartment. And I think this question is, you know, in recognition that the concerns about, you know, learning loss and, you know, the hardship on kids with schools being closed is real. And this seemed to be like a way of trying to mitigate some of that, to have a learning hub at the Greenleaf Gardens apartments. Kids weren't having to travel to school. They were getting, you know, help in getting online and, you know, help with their, you know, classes. And it's hard to tell who got these DC Hope grants to do what. You can tell who got the grant, but the website at least doesn't say what the grants are for. So I don't know if more than one was given for this type of learning hub or if this was the only one. But I think this points to there are other ways that DCPS could consider trying to address the concerns of, you know, they have on equity and learning loss, and this could be one way to do it. So why hasn't DC done more to try to support these types of learning hubs at homeless shelters and public housing complexes?
Yeah, I'm really our good projects in DC. That's obviously in Ward 6. I've been down there and visited with them several times, and it's great, absolutely great program. So DC Housing Authority, which, you know, is not DC government, that's federal. So it's a DC Housing Authority is a kind of quasi-governmental entity. So they gave the space for free. So all the space that's basically in what we call the family center at Greenleaf, they've given all the rooms over for this program, which is great. And, you know, they've got, you know, the tables are all set up. They've got plexiglass, they've got adults, trusted adults. They've got all the supplies and everything else. They've got the food service. They've got some office space for their administrators. They've got access to the fields outside, things like that. So it's a really great program. They're doing really, really good work. And DC Housing Authority, I do think is helping in this, and that they have given them that space. Not all of our public housing also, though, has that type of a family enhancement center. And so that's why it works really well at this location. When I talked with them when I was down there maybe 2 weeks ago, I was asking them, all right, what would it take to scale up? What would it take to be able to, you know, replicate this somewhere else? And they're like, space. It's space. Like that's what we have to have, because you got to have enough space for the, you know, to have the critical mass of kids that be spaced out the right way. You know, like we just don't have that many places that could essentially just give us, you know, for free, a large dedicated space every single day. Like they've basically turned it into their office, and that's really hard. So I was having this exact same conversation with them about how do we scale that up and how do we identify other locations. So I want to continue that. How do we get that into a bigger space? Our challenge is physical in many cases. And especially when you think about our public housing in Ward 6, Greenleaf has that, but I mean, Hopkins, Potomac don't have a family resource center like that. They don't have the physical space that they could just turn over and dedicate 24/7 to this.
But there could be nearby spaces, maybe not a part of the public housing. I mean, I think we have to think creatively about all of this.
I agree. I welcome any suggestions anyone has. This was the conversation that we were literally having with the Good Projects, was like trying to think through what would be a space. The thing is, to do it the way that the Good Projects has, it's got to be dedicated exclusively for them, because they've got to be able to keep food, supplies, the technology, all the things, and you can't like have other uses kind of coming in and out. They need the space to be dedicated so they can clean it, all the things they've got to do. And that is hard. It's harder, not impossible, but it's just recognizing it's harder to do.
I mean, I think if I could just offer, if DC was able to make grants available for this and put in some of the requirements like the space and other things, I think it would let a lot of organizations start thinking creatively about how they might be able to meet those needs. But I'm not seeing from DC any focused effort on trying to encourage this. And it seems like these are reaching the students that DCPS most wants to reach right now. It's meeting them at their place on their terms. And but there's, I mean, DC, you know, DC or DCPS, whoever needs to be, I think, trying to promote this more. And I'm not seeing that.
I agree with you. I have yet to hear DCPS actually say one time anything about good projects. Instead, it's DC Housing, it's Ward 6 Mutual Aid, it is our Southwest communities, it's Jefferson and Amadon Bowen. I don't think I've heard anything from DCPS about it, but it's serving DCPS kids. There's a couple of kids from KIP that are there, but it's almost all DCPS over at Good Projects in Southwest.
So can the council have a role in trying to promote this?
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to promote it around the work that they're doing there. It's getting DCPS and DME and others to actually go. If what you're saying is, can you get DME to have grants, you know, to do? There's not that many organizations that we've found thus far that actually can set up something like this. There's not that many physical spaces, but I mean, if your point though is there's a lack of creativity coming out of DCPS and DME, I 100% agree with you. It is hard to force them to be creative when they don't want to do it.
So who gave out the DC Hope grants?
I don't know off the top of my head that specific grant of which entity it came from within DC government.
Okay. Okay, so let's go, let's see. Okay, let me go back to, so there's been, Empower Ed has been doing a lot of advocacy around outdoor learning, trying to winterize some spaces at schools to promote more outdoor learning. And they've been pointing out that DC has been giving out the winterization grants to local restaurants so that we can have outdoor spaces for eating. There doesn't seem to have been anything to try to address the interest in outdoor spaces. And I think people feel it would be safer than, you know, indoor learning right now. So is there anything that can be done to try to promote that more?
I haven't heard anything from DCPS about creating winterization grants. I have not, I'll be honest though, I also have not heard from that many parents that are asking, you know, for outdoor winterized classrooms, because most families that I hear from just don't trust DCPS to set up a system in the first place. So I think that's the first like threshold question that hasn't gotten met yet before they then say, okay, let's create an outdoor winterized space. I don't think we're going to find DCPS though to be all that excited about this. I mean, I was pushing them, for example, in the fall to be able to have outdoor space back when the weather was nicer. Could you have, even just to have the kids have extracurricular outdoor spaces, whether that be, you know, a sports class or a dance class or something that can be done outdoors, physically distant, but you've got all these fields and all these outdoor spaces, and they wouldn't do it. What they would do instead is they point fingers at the teachers union and say, well, it's the teacher's fault, they won't come back. And they just point the finger at them. And I think that part of their strategy is they want enough parents to get angry at the WTU to put pressure on them. And I think that's a pretty clear strategy they've been employing.
That hasn't worked so far. I don't think.
No, it hasn't. I a handful of parents that are angry at the union, but not, I mean, by and large, I think most parents want to stand in solidarity with their teachers. They know that it's incredibly hard. Even, I mean, my teachers are great. It's hard. I mean, but I also know that, like, you know, so I think that most parents recognize how difficult it is for the teachers as well as for their students. And the blame game just isn't working. And so pointing at the teachers union doesn't fly. I mean, think about when they did the sick out. The number of families that said, you know what, I'm standing in solidarity with the union. I'm not going to have my kid go to school today. Like, if you got that many families that are doing that, like, the strategy that they've been trying to employ isn't working. But again, they haven't, I mean, in Maslow's hierarchy, like, they haven't met some of the big things yet. Like, so they can't even get parents to get angry at the teachers union yet, because they can't even deliver on the base level things yet. So until they can do that, like, they can't get you or me to get ratcheted up to get against the union until they meet these baselines, and they haven't done that yet.
So that's a good lead into this next question that's here. You signed a letter with, I believe, 3 other council members asking DCPS to form a working group of teachers, administrators, and parents to develop a plan for safely reopening. That hasn't happened. There is no working group that's been formed. Does the council have any role in, because I think working collaboratively with the teachers union, with parents, with school administrators is what people are hungry for right now. And it's the lack of that work is what's led to the lack of trust. And honestly, I think it's what's led to the rollout of plans that are not well thought out. But DCPS just, they're not doing this. So who is going to be able to kind of right this ship right now? And I think the way to right it is, even if it's taken some steps back, they've got to work more collaboratively with their stakeholders and rebuild that trust. They're not doing it right now. You guys have asked them to do it. What can be done to get them to work collaboratively?
I think there's only so far that asking is going to get you. So we've asked. They haven't done it, or what they do is they'll answer the question just in a different way. So they'll say, well, I have a chancellor's, cabinet, or whatever they call it, and that's what I'll rely on as my working group. But I don't believe that's what I meant when I signed on in that letter. And I don't think it's probably what most parents view as that. So I think that, now we're getting back to a fundamental role of, okay, what is it that we expect council and education committee to do? I think that when we're in this type of pandemic that has such an impact on kids and students and education, and there's no hearing in the summer, no hearing in the fall, one hearing gets forced, but it's gamed, certainly feels like it's gamed to have it be the day before, on a Friday before you announce something and you switch gears. It's hard for even members of the council to have confidence in kind of what the council's role or what the council's doing, which is why you're hearing me share my frustration around, the education committee, is that that's the place where you can do it. If you build a transparent process where, you don't all have to agree on every single issue, but you create a place where you can push and pull on each other and kind of try to all keep a shared goal in mind. Then you build some trust, and then you also find your areas of compromise. Okay, well, all right, I'm not going to do this, but I'll meet you here, and you find your way forward. And that hasn't happened. I do not, unfortunately, see that happening in the next 6 weeks. But 2021 is a different year, and I think that will likely be, if you're looking to where can council play a different role, and I think the council needs to, then one is going to be things like Alyssa's legislation. Are there, and I'm not here to say that her legislation is perfect yet either, but I get the idea and the intent behind it. So, I think that type of idea helps push the narrative. I don't even know if it can get the votes, but it pushes it. And then secondly, what happens next year in terms of the way the council is structured, I think will also be an important determinant in what you are seeing. Are we just sending letters to ask DCPS to do it, but we don't have many hooks to actually compel it? I think that would not rebuild the trust that's clearly broken in a lot of places.
So Charles, I'm going to be a little tough here. You're on the education committee.
Mm-hmm.
Alyssa's not even on it. You know, you, Robert Wyatt, we're not, what are you guys doing to try to help with these things here?
Well,
I mean, I can't just accept you're frustrated with the committee you're on.
Well, when you need to chair the committee. So when you don't chair the committee, I mean, why did we have a hearing? We finally had one hearing. Why do we have the one hearing? Because those of us that are members of the committee internally went and pushed to compel the hearing, to finally just force it. And that's when we got a hearing. It's when you're not the chair of the committee, you don't get to set the agenda. You don't get to I can't call a hearing on education issues. I can't do that as a member of the committee. You have to chair the committee. So I think that's why I'm being critical of the education committee. I mean, what can I do as a member? Well, you know, we take a look at Open Meetings Act. All right, so I'm a member of the committee, so I can take when a piece of legislation is moving, but the chairman's tried to bottle up one piece of legislation. I can go and amend it if I can get my votes together to move something forward. I can use the budget process like I've done for Ward 6 to be able to move school modernizations through. I'm able to move a lot of things as a member, but when you're not the chair of a committee, the chair sets the agenda. The chair sets what bills get moved forward, what hearings get called or don't get called. So that's the way that that's the way our structure works.
I'm looking through some questions now. We have a question here about SPED students. It said SPED students are also being left out of all of the planning, even when they are planning to go back. There was not any plan for children in self-contained classrooms or even those in general ed. These are the kids that we know that need online learning that is not working for them. So I think this is a question, they're being left out. A lot of, you know, it gets back to DCPS not collaboratively planning.
Agreed. I think, you know, when we think about the self-contained classrooms, I know that it doesn't feel like that they are prioritized in any way. You know, and so they'll focus on the CARES classroom, but they're not focusing on the self-contained classrooms. And if we're trying to think about, again, with an equity lens, or if I'm trying to think about prioritization, then the CARES classroom, which is basically just an adult in a room while everyone's on a computer, is not necessarily actually getting to the kids that are suffering the most learning loss. Now, I do agree that, you know, assuming that you could actually get this to work, a CARES classroom certainly helps working parents that are struggling to figure out how to be able to get work done, whose jobs are on the line, essential workers, those who don't have the money to pay for private childcare. Like, that's all good too. But if I'm prioritizing my special ed kids who need that additional or that self-contained classroom, they're not being prioritized right now by DCPS. I hear it from parents that I share a school with. I hear it from parents across Ward 6. Like, I know that's the case, and we can't, and DCPS isn't doing it.
Okay, so there's a number of questions here now about Councilmember Silverman's legislation. People are grateful that she introduced it, and the question is, what can we do to support her legislation, and including in it things like strong reporting on plans for classrooms and for, I think, COVID testing reporting. So what can we do to, you said right now there's not the votes for this?
I don't know that. I just don't, I mean, someone asked me, what do I think? I don't think that they're there yet. I haven't whipped the votes to count them yet. I just think it'll be hard to get to 9, but it's also not impossible. So if the question is, how do we get there? Yeah, I obviously can't speak for Councilmember Silverman. I think she should, you know, if you want to ask kind of like ask her what she's working on. I just want to be careful not to speak for her. But I think obviously working with our ward education councils, that's one of the ways to talk to different ward members. I think we've already heard Phil Mendelson come out strongly against this. The mayor's come out strongly against this. So you can start to count kind of based off of who you see fall in line there. And I think that I haven't heard Councilmember Grasso say he wouldn't support it, but I have my hunch is that he would not support this. So very quickly you're getting to not being able to get to 9 votes. But I think our ward education councils are one of the ways that we're able to talk to ward members. And if they're not quite comfortable with the bill yet, then it's, you know, like I'm still looking at it as well. All right, what type of amendments could be changed or what could be done you know, to be able to kind of build support and get it to the right shape? I think that's one of the strategies I would take.
So are you going to support it?
I think I just said I'm not committing to it yet because I'm still looking at it. It was only circulated the other day, but I'm very open to it. I think the intent behind it is, I think I understand what the intent behind it is, and we have until December 1st, which is 2 weeks, to be able to work on it. So I'm very open to it.
I think that's putting a lot of pressure on the, parents and the ward education councils to try to move this. It would be good if there were.
I'm not putting the pressure on you. You just asked what do we think some strategies could be. Obviously, Councilmember Silverman, it's her bill, so I can't speak for her or what her strategy is or what communication she may or may not have already had. I'm just trying to respond and offer what could be an idea.
Well, do you know why she introduced it?
She hasn't talked to me about it, no.
Can you talk with her? I assume it's because the letter you all sent didn't make any difference and she's trying to.
Sure, I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to speak for her motives or what she's, or what her intentions are. I want to be respectful of a colleague that I can't speak for her. She hasn't called me to talk to me about the bill, but I'm sure she will as we get closer to this.
Okay, there's a question here about where is the pressure to reopen coming from? We know now DCPS is having trouble getting parents to even commit to sending their kids back to the care classrooms. Yes, there are some families that want to come back, but we're not hearing overwhelming chorus of people wanting to come back. We're hearing people wanting it to be done safely. We're having rising cases in the city right now. We're getting ready to come up on 2 major holidays. Where is this coming from, this push to reopen now?
I don't know. I'm not feeling it. In terms of, I definitely have a few families that are reaching out to me that, especially students, families of students with special needs or IEPs, where they're saying, my kid is just really struggling and I'm doing everything I can at home, but I will never be able to replicate the services and supports that my kid gets at school. And so what can we do to create an in-school space? That's who I hear from families like that are saying, what could a reopening plan look like? I'm getting, Ward 6 has, we're like 90% Democrats. I have a conservative chunk somewhere in the ward. And so I definitely have gotten some, nasty emails along the lines of Trump folks of saying, reopen the schools, you idiot. But it's not many. Most people really want a safe, they want us, I mean, as a parent, I would love nothing more than my kid to be back in their classroom. But I want it to be done safely for my kids' health, for my health, for my family's health, for our teachers' health, for my teachers' families' health. Like, and I think most people aren't, at least in Ward 6, most people I don't believe are convinced that DCPS has put forward a plan to do that. So I don't hear pressure. I don't feel pressure to say, reopen the schools. I do hear from some families that are within that IEP and special needs that need additional support. They're watching their kids fall further and further behind and regress because they don't have the supports they need in the classroom. That, to me, that's compelling. Like, I would love to have DCPS focus and prioritize the right way there, but just blanket reopening, I don't know. I think there's a handful that probably would also put a little pressure on in support of that CARES model of saying, as a working family, I don't have the money to pay for childcare or other things, and so I have a hard time doing my job. But again, I'm not hearing overwhelmingly from folks that are pushing for that. People want a safe reopening, and they're not convinced that we're ready to achieve that yet.
Well, I think if I could make an observation, I think that the online learning is actually working pretty well for many families. And this is one of the questions here in the chat, really, that we're not really, I think, doing what we could do to reach out to the families who are not engaging in the virtual learning to find out how to meet their needs, whether it's creating, learning hubs like Good Projects is doing, or something else. There's been this tendency survey, and somebody asked a question about this too. It seems like a pretty limited way to try to get input from families. And so I think the question back to you is, it's once again DCPS not working collaboratively to try to understand what the needs are of families and finding ways to meet those needs. It seems like it's just been this, open at all cost approach without really understanding what the needs are.
I don't disagree with you on DCPS. Obviously, as two separate branches of government. They drive me crazy, and yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think the survey itself seems like it's almost designed to need a minimum of 2 degrees, advanced degrees, to be able to get through it. It doesn't feel accessible to all families, and in particular, I don't agree, actually, that I think virtual learning is working for most people. I have 2 people, one of whom it's working okay for, one of whom it's not. That's just the kids. It is not working well for 2 working parents who can barely scrap together 4 hours, 6 hours a day, maybe. That's most amount of time I think will get any work done is going to be about 4 hours a day until I clock in at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and then go till midnight or 1, and then get up and do it all over again. It's crushing parents. It is not work. I just don't think it's working well. I do think for some upper grades, for the kids who can really have that independent ability to be online, I do hear stories from folks saying, "Oh, our kids are doing great," and even preferring it in some cases. But it's hurting a lot of people. But we all recognize that we're all in this together. We're cutting each other some slack. This is a global pandemic, so we keep that in mind. And so, I know that inwardly, as I look at my own 2 kids, all right, if we can get through the year basically treading water, I'm not looking for massive gains this year in my own kids. I'm going to do my best. But I recognize what it is. But I think that, to your other point, though, around Like, how many kids are no longer in the system? How many families barely check in? I mean, we got early on this fall, we started getting emails about the fact that our 4-year-old was being truant, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And we didn't realize we were supposed to be logging in on Canvas on Wednesdays. And so we had apparently hit whatever the max is of unexcused absences. I'm like, all right, so if we couldn't figure that out, and like the school's now contacting us, now imagine that I've lost family members to COVID, I've lost my job, I don't know if I have a roof over my head, I'm facing eviction, and then let me see how it works. Like, that's who is suffering even more so than anybody else in this. And a online, whatever it's called, tendency survey is just going to be inaccessible to the very people who we think need it most, and that I think all of us are advocating, on behalf of the whole system. So
there's one comment in here that virtual kindergarten is awful. So I think there's, I have to say, I think I was reflecting older children rather than, I do think it's hardest for the families with the younger children.
I think pre-K4 and kindergarten can give each other a run for the money.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've been through all of the questions. I'm going to open it up for anyone that wants to say anything now.
Councilmember Allen, I just wanted to echo your point that you made early on about equity, and that, the one size fits all plan. Like you're saying, we know that our school needs are totally different, so that doesn't make sense. And in case it's ever useful, like you guys also know that our staffing is so different at every school. And so unsurprisingly, our more underserved schools have fewer staff available per student, have frequently, older staff. So our school has an extra teacher per grade level at Brent, which is crazy. And so we're able to do things that other schools can't, and there's no way that this one size fits all plan on unequal ground just further exacerbates. So just agreeing with you, and in case that data point is useful.
Yeah, thanks, Erin.
Just to follow up on what Erin said on a different example, in case it's useful, Van Ness has we have almost no English as a second language students. So we cannot rely on staff. We have like 0.2 staff who's like itinerant and is not always there. So we don't have like any flexible staff to like help with all of this. Mm-hmm. So it's just we have a specific demographic, and we have a specific set of teachers, and it's inane, and it makes me so angry to think that any school in the district can abide by this one size fits all thing, because we're all different. Like, it's ridiculous. So just wanted to underscore your point.
Well, I mean, and of course we can expand this out beyond, our current crisis that we're in, does this also create, as we move into the next year, are we able to, and this could be a whole nother meeting, so I'm not trying to start a whole nother meeting, but, could we start talking about, our schools budgeting and our staffing and the formulas that we all use and the models we all use? Does this, in its own way, does this also maybe create an opportunity for us to help push harder on rethinking that? I think a lot of us are trying to rethink a lot of things, as a part of this crisis and what the recovery is going to look like. So is there an opportunity for us to push harder on that and then try to make some gains as we move forward? Some of that is, on the council standpoint, a lot of that's going to be something we won't know for 4 to 5 more weeks to figure out what in the world it's going to look like in 2021, because there's different permutations of what that could look like in a way that make that more likely or make that less likely.
Okay, we're running out of time right now. And I know one follow-up thing is, Charles, you said that you would ask the transparency question at the weekly executive council call. And if you want to run the question by Sandra and Aaron, that'd be great. I'm not quite sure what we should or could be doing right now with Councilmember Silverman's emergency legislation. It seems like it's the only thing right now we have that might have some hope of getting DCPS to work more collaboratively. I'm open to suggestions on what we might be able to do on that.
Or was that a question?
For anybody.
Okay.
If you have an answer, Charles.
I tried to suggest some ideas, and I think unfortunately got interpreted as I was trying to put the pressure on you. That's not what I'm trying to suggest. But in terms of being able to, if you want to, I mean, certainly the first thing to do is if you wanted to reach out to Councilmember Silverman, I'm sure she'd be more than willing. I shouldn't volunteer her, but I'm sure she's more than willing to join a conversation like this. You know, and that might be helpful. And then from there, I think being able to kind of talk to your colleagues that you work with in other wards and you know, allies would be an idea as well. But that's not to put all the pressure on you. That's just an idea and a strategy.
Okay. I'm asking for help right now on any other key follow-up things that people heard from this discussion.
Hey, Suzanne, it's Valerie, and I'm on the phone, so I don't appear except with my phone number, I guess. I did want to just say that Councilmember Silverman's legislation, you know, may not have been the best legislation in the world. You know, I don't know anything about legislation, but I do know that the basis for it, the fact that everybody here has in one form or another said for the last hour and a half that they haven't been included, that things are not progressing as we have been led to believe, that there could be problems, that we need more transparency. That is what was the basis for that legislation. And the fact that you can't even get 9 people to agree that that's a problem is, to me, a really huge problem. And it makes me wonder, you know, how we as parents are supposed to even, you know, interact with our government to ensure that our public schools are being governed responsibly in a really terrible time, which this is. And I'm not blaming, you know, anybody here. I'm just putting this out. We spent an hour and a half talking about how we as parents, as teachers, as community members have not been given a clear picture. And frankly, for me, I don't even understand why we're going ahead with reopening right now when so many schools around us aren't, that they've changed those plans. I think there are just so many questions, and I get it, it's a tough decision. But when we've been sort of excluded from the get-go, I feel that it's incredible that we can't even get 9 people on the council to agree that there's a problem.
Well said, Valerie. Charles, you want to respond?
That would be a whole other series of meetings, I think, for that. I mean, I don't disagree. It is when someone asks me, does the bill have the votes? I'm just trying to be realistic and giving you just my assessment of where votes are. I have not gone and called all my colleagues. I haven't gone and talked to them. You frequently on education issues, you can kind of see where votes break down on a pretty regular basis. And so I think that's where I'm coming from to say what I think the likely outcome is at this stage. But that said, we won't know that for quite some time.
Okay, last call. Speak up if you want to say anything. Okay, thank you, Charles.
Everybody.
Thank you all for being on tonight. Let's all stay in touch with each other. Certainly more to come. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Good night.
Okay, I'm just gonna close down the meeting and then
Okay,
send you the link to the recording. Bye, everyone. Bye.
bye.
Thank you, Cedric.
Thanks, Cedric.
Bye, Brandon. Nice meeting you. I think Cedric just left.
Okay.
I think I'm done. Okay. Bye.
I'll,
Bye, thanks.
bye, Brandon. Looking forward to working with you.
Have increased every year.